of the things that they took away from there. So I'll just take a second and fire up my presentation here. Uh-oh. Gabby, how are we doing? Can you see the main screen?
Looks great.
Ah, perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, so as Sam had put, my name is Scott Gillett. I'm the Ontario Mine Rescue Officer for the Sudbury-Onaping District. I share that position with another officer, a fine gentleman by the name of Dan Davidson. And I'll just be speaking a little bit about BEV emergency response incident review. We're going to talk about a couple incidents that we had, some of our practices that we use across our organization, and then some of the best practices that we see coming down the pipe for future endeavors when we're dealing with battery electric vehicles. Okay, so on the agenda today, first off, we'll go through mine rescue procedures and operations. So that's just going to be a quick review of some of the different things that we train. Followed up by, we're going to review 3 incidents from across the province that involve battery electric vehicles, but also just involve batteries on their own. And then finally, we'll just go through challenges and best practices and identify some of the challenges that mine rescue teams face during our emergencies, and also discuss improvements that we would like to see in infrastructure in the future. Followed up by any questions that you guys might have surrounding any of those emergencies and anything around any of the best practices. So mine rescue procedures and operations, team dynamics are a big aspect for us. Briefing is an absolute essential part of any of our emergencies. A risk assessment, scene assessment, and agent application. So we're going to go ahead and break down those a little bit. When it comes to team dynamics, we always like to have a very well-balanced team. We must, at bare minimum, have a 5-person team be able to respond to that emergency. We do like to have a balance between many different trades and many different skill sets. It's very beneficial to have somebody from an engineering background, from a geologist background, from a mechanical background, electrical, miner, and so on. Everybody looks at an emergency a little bit different. Everybody brings a little bit extra to the table, and to be able to take all of those skills and all of those trades and put them together, we usually end up with a very well balanced and diverse team that comes up with excellent decisions. This also comes along with a very a well-experienced briefing officer. I think one of the misconceptions that we do run into in mine rescue is that it's not the first 5 people who come in the door at an emergency are going to be the first 5 to go underground. What we do like to see is once the members start coming in, we like to split things up and put good experience, good trade, a lot of skills, and we try and mix up our teams the best as possible. Another part of that is we like to have people who are very familiar with the work area, familiar with the mine site and the location of the emergency. Getting lost or getting turned around at a mine is always poor timing, but there's nothing worse than a team getting lost during an emergency. So we do whatever we can to make sure that we have a good sound guide to be able to get them where they need to go. When it comes to anything to deal with any sort of equipment, whether it's a diesel scoop or whether it's going to be a battery vehicle, we always like to get our tradesmen who work with it day in, day out. So electricians and mechanics, electricians definitely when we're talking about EBV equipment, but also mechanics as well. They have a very intimate relationship with that equipment. They know it inside out, and those are key players that we're sending down to respond to those emergencies. Before that team does go underground, it's good practice for us to have a second team as backup. In case anything goes awry, that team can go underground immediately and see if they can help out, and also have a third team on standby as a backup as well. As far as PPE, our PPE consists of high visibility class 3 fire rated coveralls, gloves, and safety footwear. So we're a long way away from bunker gear and some of the different things that you might see at a fire scene. However, when we start thinking about some of the different distances and the durations that we'd have our members wearing apparatus and responding to emergencies, we really run the risk of heat exhaustion when we start overburdening people with too much clothing. So our briefing officer. Briefing officer is an absolute essential part of any emergency, and any good response to an emergency always starts with a good, sound, solid briefing. So a briefing officer is going to be that liaison person between a control group, which is built of mine management, and people will talk a little bit more about control group, and the mine rescue team. So that liaison person, just to guide them along and try and fit in as much information as possible for them. So you guys can see on the page, there's a list of 20 questions. Those are the 20 questions that we ask our briefing officers to fill in. And really, when we look at that, that's going to end up being a formal non-routine hazardous task risk assessment. So in that 20-point briefing, we're going to cover some key points, like if there's any people missing, where our fresh air is going to be, where our visibility, how visibility is going to be, ventilation, our route of travel, firefighting equipment needed. It gives us a very, very good idea of what we need to prepare. One thing about different between responding to a fire scene, say on surface, and then responding to an emergency underground, is we really, really want to do our absolute best to bring everything we need for that emergency on the first shot down. Because if we start talking about logistics and cage rides and traveling, if we forget something on surface, that's a huge flaw, and that opens it up. That's a long time to try and replace that. Other questions that become involved is trying to identify some of the hazards that we might deal with. So if we have determined that there's going to be a vehicle on fire, especially when we start talking about EBVs, we're really going to be on the hunt for that SDS sheet and any kind of info that we can find to best gear our team up for an appropriate response. Maps and ventilation, having a good handle on that is essential as well. As far as some of the equipment that's needed, the equipment that we always are going to be bringing with us for EBVs is going to be TICs, extinguishing agents, and it's going to be what's most suitable for the situation, but also what's going to be available. There's a big difference between what we can find at a mine site Tuesday at noon in comparison to what we can find at Christmas Eve, you know, at 2:30 in the morning. So it's important to see what we can find and what is available. When we are dealing with vehicles, we always ask our briefing officers to look for a little bit more information. That's going to be the contents of the vehicle. You know, is the vehicle hauling AMFO or any kind of explosives or any kind of oil or resin, anything that might be causing us some problems. The intensity of the fire. Have the tires been involved in that? Because as they were talking about with the Craig fire, definitely the smoke got a lot worse after that. If there's any arcing, anything like that. So information on that SDS sheet, so definitely a key player when we start talking about EBVs, access to key information, so hazards, chemicals and metals, gas testing for specific gases. So the gas monitors that we send our teams down with test for carbon monoxide, they test for methane, and they also test for oxygen. However, if we need to test for a more exotic gas like hydrogen or hydrogen fluoride, we're going to have to find a different testing agent for that, and we just have to line that up before we send our teams underground. As far as firefighting, there's always key information in that SDS, whether there's a specific extinguishing agent, any special precautions we need to take around it, and then also going to line out any points of access and the battery location. On different vehicles, you know, is the battery going to be at the front? Is the battery going to be at the back? Is it going to be the entire underbelly of that vehicle? So always key stuff for us to be in the know about, and very helpful when we send our teams to respond. Just in talking about ventilation a little bit, when it comes to a mine rescue emergency, dealing with EBVs or with any gas, we're always going to try and do what we can do to make it as safe as possible for those teams responding. So if we can have a team approaching that fire through fresh air and through clean air and not in an exhaust, that's definitely the principle, and that's what we're going to try and follow. It might be a little bit of a longer route. However, to keep our team safe, that's absolutely a necessity for us. Once a team does travel down underground and does travel to the scene, the team is always tasked with doing a scene assessment. So mine rescue teams are tasked with doing an emergency scene assessment throughout every emergency. When we do our training, and I looked through the list of attendants today, we have some longtime mine rescue veterans in the class today. One thing we preach for all of our new volunteers and even those who have retired from mine rescue and moved on to other projects If I were to ask them what those 4 main principles of mine rescue would be, I'm pretty sure they'd be able to sound them off without question. Number 1 for us is always going to be safety of the mine rescue team and ensuring that that's going to be a safe process. Number 2 is going to be rescue any injured or missing workers. 3 is going to be respond and resolve to fires and non-fire emergencies. And then finally 4, restore mine to our normal operations. Okay, so those are the things and those are our priorities we keep in mind when we do any kind of work underground for an emergency. So when they do get to the scene and they do start that scene assessment, we're just going to be having a look at that emergency, trying to identify any hazards, physical or atmospheric, that we might be facing, and then also any resources, anything that we can use in the area that might be beneficial to us. After that, between the control group, the briefing officer, and the team itself, we'll devise a plan. We'll make an action plan on that, and then once we've come up with a sound plan, we'll then execute that plan, and then we'll reassess throughout the emergency to see if we're winning or losing. So as far as agent application, 2 different forms of agent application we can go through. We can go through indirect and direct attack. Just to talk a little bit about accountability of personnel underground. That's a big landmark for us when we're dealing with underground personnel. As soon as we account for everybody who is working underground and we've made sure that everybody has made their way and is safely inside a refuge station, that's a very, very nice moment for us. That opens up a lot of doors and opens up a lot of different opportunities for us. First and foremost, when we're looking at some of the different fires that we might have to attack, especially with some of the EBV batteries, we would be much more inclined to follow an indirect attack, which is definitely at a much lower risk. Some of those different attacks might be to alter ventilation, just by building a barricade wall and trying to snuff out the fire. High expansion foam, so we can see up in the picture just on the top there, you can see the foam coming out the top, building a barricade or building a brattice and filling an entire drift with foam and completely covering it. However, we can't be doing those tasks if we have missing people. If it's not going to be able to support life of a fire, it's not going to be able to support life of a human. So those are tasks that we just can't carry out. And then finally, if the fire is that out of control, we just monitor it from a distance and allow that fire to burn out. And if it's a 10-hour process, a 12-hour process, that's an awfully long time for people to be sitting in the refuge station. However, it is a safe location, and that's what they are designed for. Finally, if our accountability isn't made, and we haven't made accountability for everybody, and we do have people who are stuck behind the fire, we do have to take a much more direct approach, and that comes at a higher risk. So definitely when we are assessing those scenes, isolation where possible, then we're going to be applying water to it. And as the gentleman from McLean had talked about, we're looking to apply a mountain of water, an awful lot of water, as much as we can find. Water is also our biggest medium to find underground. It's the easiest thing for us to find underground and a key player in the game. So as you can see, just in that middle photo, you'll have we do like to set up a double hose attack on that. One is going to be on a fog pattern, which almost adds like a curtain in front of our teams to cool down and prevent any splashback on the team. And then a straight stream through that fog curtain into the suspect areas of that into the hot spots of that fire. We also have low expansion foam and compressed air foam system. And then we do also have AFFF, which is just on the bottom screen. That's an aqueous form filming foam. My goodness, I'm sorry about that one. Ontario Mine Rescue incidents that we've dealt with so far. So we will talk about one incident from Southern Ontario. We'll be dealing with an incident here in Sudbury-Onaping, and then finally we'll close up with an incident in Red Lake. So incident number 1 in the Southern District, September 19th, 2019, at approximately 17:30, an underground worker had noticed black smoke and orange flame coming from a charging parking station. The worker noted at least one vehicle was on fire and then proceeded to the refuge. At 17:32, emergency procedures were implemented. Black smoke became visible from the mine shaft entrance. Smoke exiting the return airways actually ended up forcing evacuations of surrounding buildings. So some administration buildings got evacuated, the mill got evacuated, so it definitely had an impact on the entire property. 1830, all underground employees were accounted for. So like we discussed, that landmark was hit, and that's a very nice moment for us. 1940, team number 1 traveled down portal ramp to approach the fire from fresh air. So definitely a best practice for us is to be able to allow that team to approach that in a much safer atmosphere. At 2022, teams arrived at the charging station, power is locked out, power is isolated, and the teams begin firefighting. One thing the team did notice when on arrival was ground conditions have deteriorated from exposure to the fire. At 2206, team number 2 responded with a water truck. This mine we're dealing with here did not have any water underground. So the team responded with a water truck and extinguished that fire. At 2246, team ensured that the gases in the mine were clear, so cleared all the mine of anything dangerous, barricaded the area, and the all clear was given from the control group, and then the mine was evacuated. So that's number 1 from our southern district. Okay, so root cause, a faulty charging cable backfed to the first vehicle, which then propagated to 2 more vehicles, causing extreme heat. 3 vehicles were consumed in the fire, as well as all lights and conductors in the charging area. So that little buggy on the bottom of the screen is what that vehicle is to look like on a good day. However, it definitely is not looking so good in this picture here. So where you can see that cap lamp, that's actually identifying a fall of ground during the incident from the extreme heat. Important to note all of the flaking that's going on in the background of that. The fire burned out the first 12 inches of the ground control rebar bolt resin and melted away all phone, fiber optic, and radio feeder cables to the mine. Batteries in 2 vehicles were completely consumed with light impingement on that 3rd battery. So definitely some high heat and a substantial amount of damage. And then finally, just to look at some of the severe heat damage and melted steel away from the aluminum flame. So not your typical pallet fire when we talk about the heat coming off of there. Incident number 2, Sudbury-Onaping District. So July 6, 2020 at approximately 10:50 p.m. Initial fire was reported that 2 contractors working on an electric truck. Information was received through brief contact with the workers, reported that they had no compressed air and were trapped on the other side of the vehicle on fire. Within minutes of initial contact, no further communication with the 2 contractors could be established. So as an officer on that, reading that first text message and that coming across the phone, definitely a heart-sinking moment. That's stacking the odds pretty hard against us. So this was a picture taken by the 2 workers behind the fire, so not a very comfortable sight to be looking at for the next couple hours. Emergency procedures were implemented soon after. Team number 1 went underground at 1 o'clock and encountered the fire scene at 1:55. There was dark black smoke with extreme heat were encountered, and they were using their thermal imaging camera. I'll show you guys some footage from that shortly. They were reading up to 700 Fahrenheit with that thermal imaging camera. Communication was affected and could not be established at the work site. So when we start talking about some of that dark black smoke, other things that can be compromised is definitely our visibility. Our team being able to see where they're going is essential, and that was definitely jeopardized. Poor communication in any emergency definitely adds another layer of difficulty in trying to relate those messages and stay on the same page with those on surface. So here's just a small print of what we're looking at. So our 2 gentlemen were stuck behind the fire. So before I press play on this, I just have to apologize. The timestamp on there, so this is video footage from our thermal imaging camera. The timestamp on there is incorrect. It is about 6 hours in the future. The temperature gauge is going to be on the side. So as you see the colors coming off of that flame, that temperature gauge is going to give you a good direction on what kind of heat we're looking for. I do encourage you to look at the bottom screen where you see the numbers in Fahrenheit, and please see as the temperature is changing, as the camera is moving around, hitting different hot spots on that vehicle, I do encourage you to see how hot those numbers actually get. And just another note before I press play on this, the mine rescue team that was bravely fighting this fire, their visibility was compromised so much they were looking through the thermal imaging camera, which has a 3.5-inch screen on it, and they were just trying to trace where the cold water was landing on the hotspots, just because the visibility was impaired that much. It was that essential of a tool. One thing I also encourage you guys to see is just once the water is put on there, how fast that flare up happens again, how fast that battery erupts again. So we'll press play, we'll watch this for about a minute. Okay, so team number 1 continued to advance on the fire scene and knocking down the flames. During this attack, they had started to notice some cap lamps moving behind the engulfed vehicle. Definitely an emotional experience for that team to be at that scene, to be fighting that fire with a fire that drastic, and to be able to see some lamps moving around behind there. Definitely a sigh of relief. However, due to poor communication, team number 1 had to retreat to their while the team was communicating with surface, the 2 gentlemen who were behind that fire decided to take their chance at it, walk around that scene, and ended up meeting up with our mine rescue team. So both contractors were protected with a breathing apparatus. We use an SSR 90, which is a 90-minute oxygen generating apparatus. They were packaged up, transported to surface, and then we handed them off to EMS. Team 2 was sent to the fire scene at 3:15 to finish extinguishing the fire. The fire was declared out at 4:36 hours, and the team remained on site until about was done. One of the things that they had definitely vocalized was, as they were working on both sides of the body of the battery, hitting both cells, they would cool down one cell down to a normal temperature. They'd move over to the other side and fight the other cell of the battery. As they'd come back, that battery had begun to heat up again and begin to cause some problems. Team number 3 was then dispatched to ensure clean air throughout the mine and successfully completed that task. At 9:09, a control group gave the all clear to workers, and they were advised to leave the refuge station and travel to surface. So an emergency wrapped up there. Incident number 3, a couple years ago now, but June 12th, 2018, incident occurred between shift and was discovered by night shift in an underground shop shelving underground shop. So what was involved was a shelving unit containing batteries and a charging unit. So the fire had started on the top shelf. Sorry. Which burned through to the second shelf, which also contained lithium-ion batteries. The engulfed shelving and batteries fell to the ground and continued to burn. So if we just look at the bottom, we can see the destruction that's taken place. At 2100 hours, team number 1 traveled underground to investigate the fire. Team arrived at the scene and encountered rechargeable battery fire. Team extinguishers were used, and the fire was reported out at 22.
Sorry about that, guys. Lost some good pictures there. Definitely a lot of destruction from that fire, and really what it ended up coming out of that was a lot of 18-volt batteries were stored in one area. One had ended up faulty during the charging process, ended up catching on fire, and all of the batteries involved in that area caught on fire as well. In total, it was about 30 18-volt batteries. So some of the challenges that we're faced with as far as response to any emergency is just going to be what we can put together at the beginning of that emergency. So information on vehicles is an absolute essential. You guys touched on that many times today. Having a robust SDS available for mine rescue teams, for control groups, and to have that easily accessible. Definitely, it's very, very nice to have those on shared drives and on computers, but also to have a hard copy in case we're to have any kind of an electric failure as well. Infrastructure for battery and charging areas is definitely an asset when we start talking about some of the challenges. They can, we can have an awful lot of potential as far as, even if we consider that Red Lake incident, if we store all our batteries in one area, although it's good housekeeping, it does give a lot more combustible and does give a lot more fuel for those fires if one is to take place. Resources can be a challenge. That's something that we have faced. Resources as far as finding proper water headers underground. If we deal with some very, very large mines, so for a team to reach up, 15, 20 feet off the ground and try and hook up a header in a very smoky drift, that's difficult. So drop headers and having that available is a necessity. Location of the incident. So, the processes that we're going through now, we're making deeper mines that are going to be further away from the shaft station and much more difficult for us to get to. So that greater distance means a lot more team travel and a lot more oxygen time and a lot longer of problems. Unknown status of fires is also definitely a challenge for us. Our response time, usually by the time we get all of our equipment ready to go, all of our briefing done, it can be an hour, it can be 2 hours. Things can get a lot worse in that 2-hour window. If we're to look at that Southern District incident where we had one vehicle on fire to begin with, then another one became involved, followed by a third one. So things can get worse if we have a very cluttered area. And then limited access to cooling ports. A lot of these vehicles that we're dealing with are built very strong. They're built very tough. The underground environment is definitely an unforgiving one. Limited access to cooling ports can be very difficult when we're trying to cool down those cells and put on that mass amount of water that manufacturers are asking for. Best practices, communication with the mine is definitely an asset. We are going to break that down a little bit more. SDS availability, which we talked through. Control groups, having a good sound control group is an essential. Continued training of mine rescue personnel as tradespeople. Strong emergency response plans, planned infrastructure, resource availability, and communication among industry. So I'm just going to break those down a little bit more. So between communication with mines and SDS availabilities, we would like to have with our mining clients mutual understanding of what electric vehicles they are going to have on site. It's always very beneficial when we start talking about vehicle tracking to be able to find specific and pinpoint locations of where vehicles are going to be underground, locations of battery vehicle charging stations and storages, so to be able to know exactly where those points are and the quantities that are going to be involved in there. Is it going to be multiple batteries for a 40-ton rock truck, or is it going to be much, much smaller batteries? So just to be able to define that. Rapid accessibility to that SDS for control groups and mine rescue teams. Updated catalog as EBV program develops. So definitely we are in a line of work where there's going to be drastic changes among industries dealing with electric batteries, making sure that catalog follows suit. So as there's an improvement, we make sure that SDS sheet is impacted. Strong and well-balanced control groups. So people who have a very good understanding of procedures in the mine, of the electrical infrastructure in the mine, the ventilation infrastructure in the mine, just good sound decision-making control groups so that we can come up with a good plan and follow that plan. Mine rescue program for us, from our standpoint, training of Electrical and mechanical tradespeople in OMR is an essential for us. Continued research and development on best practices with fires. Definitely something that we are going to be gaining some experience on and gaining some confidence going forward with it. Updated and well-designed emergency response plans that we can develop or co-develop with our mining clients, and then have those trialed and reviewed on a regular basis, just to make sure that we are accepting that risk, we are knowing our risk, and we're having a look at it. Mine infrastructure is definitely a huge one, resources as well. So strategic placement of charging stations and storage during the planning stage. So as we are starting to build, newer mines and newer headings and newer areas, really start building about how we're going to, really start thinking about how we are going to plan out those drifts. If we were to have a charging station, one nice thing to see is it by a return air race or near an exhaust, somewhere where if that is to be compromised and that is to catch on fire, that ventilation and that smoke is up and gone and out of there. So it's giving our teams the best chance to get to that in a good atmosphere. Proper handling and removal of excess batteries, making sure that there's nothing unneeded underground, and we get that our housekeeping is up to standard and we get that up and out of there. Remote gas monitoring. Remote gas monitoring gives us an excellent idea of what's going on underground before we can expose any team to that. So knowing what our CO levels are, knowing what our oxygen levels are, the more information we can get from those gas monitors is very, very beneficial to us. That's also going to come in handy with seismic monitors as well. We did have a fire scene in the province this year where we were able to detect that the tires had actually blown out from the fire through the seismic monitor. So, I mean, it's not really directed at a mine rescue procedure. However, it's very, very nice to have those tools. We can make it all work to give us the best, fullest picture. Advanced monitoring in charging stations. So whether, we had discussed thermal charging and keeping an eye on the temperature of chargers as we're going through the day, but then also live video of that as well. So we can review that footage and see what we are sending our teams into. Access to water. So drop headers and water pressure. Making sure that we have, in those high traffic areas, in those areas where those EBVs are going to be working, making sure that we do have access to water within, close proximity to one another, and making sure that the water pressure is going to be adequate. I think back to my mining days, walking into some headings, cracking on a header and not being able to even wash down the muck pile. That's going to be very, very difficult when we start talking about putting out an electric battery fire where we need mass quantities of water. And as we start talking about deeper and further mining projects, accessible transportation for our mine rescue teams, being able for them to load the basket up with all their equipment, their apparatus, and be able to comfortably sit in a vehicle and drive to the emergency. That's a lot less stress on our team members, and that allows them to do a lot better work once they do get to the scene.